Think about this. Has there been a PS5 game that's better than Returnal? It's been 3 years since the release of the game, and in the summer of 2024, I'm still thinking about it. Developed by Housemarque, formerly makers of arcade twin-stick shooters like Super Stardust, Resogun, and Nex Machina, Returnal marked the studio's first foray into the world of big-budget, AAA, marquee titles for a new console generation and a wide audience. But remarkably, without compromising on design philosophies that made the studio special. Developed for the PlayStation 5, Returnal was one of the first roguelike games made for a AAA audience. A third-person, dark sci-fi arcade action game with a well-rounded protagonist unearthing some kind of suppressed trauma through a surreal narrative. A non-traditional AAA modern Sony game. The niche meeting the broad. In other words, my type of shit. Even in 2021, Returnal felt different. Special. It embodied the promise of a new generation, of limitless possibilities for unique experiences only available on new hardware that would go on to become part of a library we'd consider console-defining. Fast SSD, meaningful mechanics through the adaptive triggers, fast-paced combat with bullet hell addictive gameplay, a concert of challenge, and a surreal narrative to really sink yourself into. A real next-gen title. A special game. Before even beating it properly, I could tell Returnal would undoubtedly become one of these console-defining games. And even though, in my opinion, it's since risen to that status, it's not in spite of any serious software competition. Aside from Astro, have we even had anything remotely like this game since? Any game that's earned a spot on the next-gen shelf? No. How sad is it that 4 years on, a launch window game is still, really, the only hardware-defining game available on the PS5? After beating Returnal, I was excited for what unique experiences awaited me in the coming months from PlayStation. After all, they've spent the last 20-some-odd years cultivating studios that specialize in making quirky, odd, interesting, unique, formative experiences only available on their hardware. Suffice to say, Sony has been lacking in these kinds of experiences this time around. And I, like many others, have found that fundamentally disappointing. And with the PS5 reportedly entering the back half of its console lifecycle, it's got me wondering what kind of experiences will ultimately define the PS5, if not for those odd, interesting titles. Until then, however, by keeping their design philosophical roots, leveraging new hardware, and realizing an innovative story. It's Returnal that's proved itself to be PlayStation 5's most important game. It's been 3 years since the release of Returnal, and in the summer of 2024, I'm still waiting for another formative title from PlayStation. New channel, same series. Break the cycle and don't fear the Reaper. It's time for Season 2. Welcome to Save Room.
When first jumping into Returnal, one of the first things I wanted to do was just define the project goals first, right? I mean, we had a really big budget, we're shooting for the stars, and you know what they say, right? I mean, anyone can handle adversity, but if you want to test a game developer's character, just give them a big budget.
That was Harry Kruger, game director at Housemarque, during his masterclass presentation on the making of Returnal. It's the opening seconds of the video, and already Kruger lays out the first major factor of Returnal's success.
And back then, I remember saying that AAA for us just means awesome arcade action.
Not losing what made Housemarque games so special. Games cost a shit ton of money to make. It's no secret that budgets for AAA games have been ballooning at an alarming rate for the past several years. I've talked about this at length in at least 2 of my other videos. And tired as perhaps the conversation may be, it's worth the reminder each and every time that, in the long run and for the sake of the health of the industry, that these massive, ever-increasing budgets are unsustainable and need to be managed accordingly. In an interview with PC Magazine, former Dragon Age lead writer David Gator criticized the state of the industry, saying, "There's this fear that exists. If we don't have everybody working overtime and we don't make AAA games that have $200 million budgets and the focus is on photorealistic graphics and 1,000-hour playtimes, then we need to pack all that in and work everyone to death making it, and that's the only way to make these games." And he's right. Obviously, games from giant studios that take years to make are going to cost a lot of money. And those house their own set of issues outside the scope of this video. But there's an air of monoculture in the current landscape of gaming that plagues a lot of AAA titles and what the modern day expectations of what those games are or aren't supposed to look like. I don't need every game to, graphically, compete with the likes of Hollywood blockbuster movies. I don't need every game to be a multi-100-hour epic set in a world you're meant to live and work in. I don't need every game to be a 1,000-hour, multiplayer, multi-year investment I sacrifice years of my life to. And I certainly don't need a publisher to work on 8 separate sorts of these titles in an already overly saturated market. It's just too much. Somewhere along the way, developers or publishers forgot that games can and often should be formative experiences that take bold and interesting swings. It's okay for games to be short but impactful. It's okay for games to be smaller in scope and size. It's even okay for expensive games to allocate resources toward other aspects of game development. It's okay for things to end. This is what Kruger makes clear in his presentation. Early in development, Returnal was symptomatic of all the things we criticize with AAA. Mindless hordes of enemies with one-dimensional combat. Content bloat with no meaningful quests. Expanding beyond the scope with too many additional systems. It wasn't working. It was way too much. Sometimes less is more, even with a bigger budget. And Housemarque responded by stripping the game back down to what made sense for the team's vision. Down to only the necessities that supported telling a story about isolation through challenging gameplay. The result, of course, speaks for itself. You know, I can't help but think about Elden Ring and how it, despite a lofty budget of an estimated $200 million, the likes of which competes with games like Cyberpunk, Red Dead, and yeah, even Call of Duty, is praised for how the team at From Software leveraged the massive budget to push the Souls level design, art direction, and narrative toward monumental new heights. The irony that I've now spent more time running around the lands between than any other live service modern day AAA game of the last, 5 to 7 years. Game is that good, dude. So, when we think about Returnal, Housemarque approached the design of the game as a response to not just the crisis of big budgets, but to the library of milquetoast games the modern day industry feels so desperate to continue churning. For Housemarque, keeping the studio's philosophical roots was vital to creating something that would challenge the expectations of what we considered AAA, but without sacrificing the identity of the studio. Arcade wasn't dead. It was just repurposed and repackaged for a bigger audience. An odd, interesting title. A bold swing. Gameplay is king. That's probably a bit of a reductive statement, as narrative is obviously a main pillar of games, but as an interactive medium, how we engage with any game, even just on the controller level, plays an important role for how we experience a story. So, even though Housemarque realized that they had to create a big, bold, ambitious story, even the likes of narrative director Gregory Ludin understood that in order to tell that story, tight, responsive, and reactive gameplay needed to be at the center. If you wanted to distill it down to a single genre, you could probably call Returnal a third-person shooter. And yet, that same categorization is somehow antithetical to how many modern shooters operate. In Returnal, the camera sits far back behind the shoulder, offering a wide view of the arena in order to better track enemy movement. Celine is agile, mobile, easy to control to avoid the colorful bullet hell orbs from enemy hostiles. Jumps are unrealistically big, and dashes grant both iframes and a momentary flash of visual flair. It's unique, stylish, and cool. But most importantly, it feels good to control. That's also thanks in part to how Housemarque leveraged hardware to create more dynamic combat. Returnal's use of the DualSense goes beyond gimmicks and straight to core gameplay mechanics. Even Ludin, again, understood the importance of gameplay, citing the philosophy of the game's design, centering on being a showcase for the PlayStation 5 through 3D audio, fast loading, the DualSense, and more. And this showcase is largely due to the DualSense's adaptive triggers, with combat leveraging the use of aiming with the left trigger. Half press to aim, full press to enter alt fire. And with many guns with different abilities available to find across a level, the constant dance of shooting both of these two modes never stopped feeling engaging. Further, in any given arena, Returnal's language of combat centers around both aggression and positioning within the terrain. Rather than taking cover behind objects in the environment, you're encouraged to jump, dash, and grapple around as you shoot, maintaining close proximity to eliminated enemies in order to collect material used to upgrade or purchase temporary items. More aggression means more obolites. More obolites means a better chance for a successful run. Platforming over enemy orbs in order to get in close for a finishing melee is as cathartic as boosting through the enemies of previous Housemarque title, Resogun. Arcade isn't dead, it's just been repurposed. Even more integral to its success is the way narrative is interwoven into Returnal's gameplay, thanks to partial inspiration from the literary genre, the New Weird. As a roguelite, every time you die, Celine is reborn just moments after crash landing on the world of Atropos. A temporal impossibility, but one that is still easy enough to buy in the context of a sci-fi story. And yet, on the surface, a game that's about surviving a crash landing on an alien planet is finally physically and psychologically flipped on its head the moment Celine runs into her home from Earth, mysteriously placed in the forest of Atropos. It invokes a weird feeling, eerie even, discomfort, disquieting. Even more bizarre is the way Celine's supposed memories begin to overwrite themselves with alternate events that may or may not have actually happened.
I've never seen this before.
From here, we begin to ask more questions. Was Celine's reality ever objective reality? What is actually the root cause of the temporal phenomenon? And should we fear the hell of Celine's interior more than what lies out there? Half the game goes by. You reach the target broadcast signal. You defeat Nemesis. You finally escape. You win. From here, a cutscene starts and you watch time go by. Years and years. You spend the remainder of your life living in the farmhouse, playing piano, and walking through surrounding fields. You live, you age, you eventually die. For all intents and purposes, it should be game over here. Suddenly, Selena wakes right back where she started. Stranded, left to face whatever is keeping her here. You ask more questions, and only ever receive glimpses of answers. Everything you thought about the game up until this point was only ever scratching the surface. The game, this game, demands more. It's not so much that you're not done with Returnal, but that it's not done with you. And it's here where the eerie, surreal tension is at its most gripping, where the game becomes more. This is Returnal, a AAA game, an odd title, a bold swing, a formative experience. People crave new games like this. People crave fun. People crave authenticity, vision, and a strong artistic direction. In this regard, Returnal thrives on the non-traditional modes of storytelling that exist outside the realm of modern AAA blockbusters. When other games played either too safe or too familiar, Returnal leans toward creating tension and friction, both created by its complex story and challenging gameplay. And even though you might lose audiences by sacrificing mass market appeal, whatever that means, the result is creating a game, a piece of art, that's truly inspired. Despite all our rhetoric, the PlayStation 5 is still a financially successful console. As of May, it's sold an estimated 59 million units, meaning despite missing various sales targets throughout the last 4 years, it's still on track to become the third best-selling console of all time, excluding handhelds. Not only will it eventually overtake the PS4 in lifetime sales, the PS5 is already poised to overtake its predecessor in lifetime income, making it Sony's most profitable console ever. So, with all the success, all the playtime, the mind share, the piles of cash rolling in, how is it the PS5 still feels like a disappointment? The answer, of course, lies with software. Sony hasn't needed an array of first-party games this generation to turn its profit, relying not just on third-party games and partnership deals to do most of the heavy lifting, but an expensive slate of peripherals and the introduction of broader services to continue generating revenue from its consumers. Depressing, I know, but I get it. Gaming is a business. The most profitable medium in the world, actually. But as an enjoyer of art, the output from Sony's own studios has been sorely missed. So far, partnership exclusives have led Sony through most of the PS5's success. Just this year, you got titles like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Stellar Blade, Tekken 8, and Helldivers 2. Impressive! And yet, also troubling. Let me explain. Clearly, the claim that the PS5 has no games just isn't true. There are 4 big games from this year alone, with more on the way later this year. And we haven't even mentioned some of the first-party games that have already been released over the last 3 years. There are games. The problem is that there are very few and very infrequent unique experiences made for the PS5 that leverage the console in any interesting or meaningful ways. And that's including some of the first-party games. In terms of leveraging the SSD, there are 2 first-party games that come to mind that use the hardware to innovate on an existing franchise. Both of them from Insomniac. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart utilized portals for teleportation, while Spider-Man 2 allowed for faster traversal while swinging around New York. And while Rift Apart was a moderately enough successful title, I think it's safe to say Spider-Man 2 somewhat disappointed. With a budget of roughly $300 million, yeah, fuck it, $300 million, developer aspirations quickly turned to items beyond the scope of the project. Things were cut. Set pieces were scaled back. Timetables for a finished product, whether mandated by Sony or not, were rushed. I'm not saying Spider-Man 2 is a bad game through and through, but that for a $300 million next-gen game, it failed to live up to expectations, let alone resonate more than the first title did just a few years prior. One could argue that God of War Valhalla is in a similar boat. Is Valhalla a bad game? Of course not. It's amazing. But is it a meaningful title for the PlayStation 5? Does it leverage the hardware in interesting ways? Does it sell systems? Does it resonate deeper than the previous title from a few years ago because it's on a new console? I'm not so sure. My point is that despite an impressive lineup of games available on the PS5, whether through first-party or third-party partnerships, none of them have felt next-gen. Most games available on the console suffer from giant blockbuster design bloat, reductive genre trends, and live service fatigue. It's here where Returnal really does break that mold by actively avoiding some of the pitfalls that come with designing a game with a broader AAA appeal. Scaling down, rather than up, and focusing on only what's necessary to tell a unique story is how Returnal becomes a proper next-gen title. And it's why it resonates. I'm gonna be honest, it took me so long to even remember Horizon Forbidden West came out like 2 years ago. But I have nothing nice to say about that game, so. Pretty game. Let's move on. So, despite an honestly steady flow of partnership, third-party, and some first-party games, very few from the catalog have felt like they've appropriately leveraged next-gen hardware. And even fewer have felt like smaller, quirky, unique, console-defining experiences. Thank God for Astro's Playroom. That is the only game, really, outside Returnal, to feel like an experience made from the ground up for the PlayStation 5. A few months after the release of Dune Part 2, director Denis Villeneuve mentioned in an interview with The Independent how sad it was that no other movie this year had topped his movie at the box office. That nothing had come closer than Dune at crossing $1 billion. And it's true, despite an impressive lineup of films this year, like Challengers, Furiosa, and Civil War, box offices have struggled. Not even the likes of action comedy The Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling could draw crowds in, as the movie faltered and quickly went to home streaming. In fact, it wasn't until recently with Pixar's Inside Out 2 that a movie this year finally topped Dune, and finally crossed $1 billion. A big win for Disney, and an even bigger win for Pixar, but a sad truth that original films just aren't doing numbers anymore. And if they don't do numbers, then why would studios want to make them? The games industry is in a similar spot. Even though the business is growing, player growth has been in decline, falling back down to pre-COVID numbers. There's now less people playing games than a few years ago. And if you want to make money from fewer gamers, then you have to capitalize by making games as risk-averse as possible with that aforementioned amorphous mass market appeal. More live service, more Souls-lights, more busy work open world RPGs, more safe, bland, same old, less bold swings. Sony is, sadly, positioned at making games in the former, with more live service, evolving genre games on the way than traditional first-party games. And as we've mentioned, even some of those aren't asymptomatic of falling toward the current big-budget monoculture malaise. As a response, it's Team Asobi yet again with Astrobot later this year that's been the reinvigorating shot in Sony's first-party arm. I, like many others, can't wait for that game. But just like Denis' comments about Dune 2, it's also kind of sad that it's up to Team Asobi again to step up and create something potentially console-defining, and not any of the tentpole first-party studios. Not surprising then that Sony doesn't even consider Asobi to be a major franchise studio or Astro a major title. As far as Sony is concerned, if you aren't a multi-$100 million mature blockbuster with mass appeal and a Hollywood cast, or a cash cow seeking live service title, then you're just stuffing for the current portfolio. Relegated from the big leagues of a showcase down to the state of play. It's tough to parse out where Housemarque falls in all of this. Returnal was, fortunately, among the lineup of games revealed during Sony's Future of Gaming showcase back in 2020. Sandwiched between a VFX rundown of the PS5's technical capabilities and the announcement of Sackboy: A Big Adventure. And even though games like Stray and Destruction All-Stars sit on either side of those during the showcase's pacing, my gut instincts, however, tell me Sony placed more stock in the developer, using Returnal as a technical showcase to keep the pace of the video exciting. And even though Housemarque isn't necessarily interested in creating games that act as interactive HBO dramas, the studio was subsequently acquired after the release of Returnal. There's confidence in the team that they can create something that widens the portfolio in truly meaningful ways. And only time, and where the next Housemarque announcement will show up at, that'll truly be telling of how Sony views this studio. Hopefully, they aren't also relegated to the supposed smaller titles that fill out gap years. Mind you, this wasn't always the case. Up until late into the PS4 era, there was reverence for the oddity of smaller, unique, bold, but console-defining experiences. Not everything needed to be mass market. As the masthead of Aero Game Studio says, a game for everyone is a game for no one. And if we want this generation to thrive, then we desperately need more of these games. This is pure speculation, but leadership can and does play a big role for what a console's portfolio looks like in the long term. In that regard is the myriad of live service titles, and the closing of smaller, important studios. Is that a side effect of Jim Ryan's Sony? Maybe. Time will tell, and we'll have to see what Hermen Hulst's PlayStation looks like after a few years. However, there's already a glimmer of hope as PlayStation currently makes plans to return to Tokyo Game Show for the first time since Jim Ryan took over. And for me, already this bodes well. Perhaps we'll see a healthier, return-to-form version of Sony we've grown used to from previous generations. I'd wager that, for many, Returnal was the first roguelite experience they've played. And that's okay. Leveraging AAA to expose more people to different genres is a good thing. Let's continue using Elden Ring as one of our main gaming zeitgeist contrasts for just a second. For many, Elden Ring was their first Souls game. Through Elden Ring, they learned how to navigate challenging encounters. They learned how to understand complex, lore-driven narratives. They learned how to engage with a growing community to better interact with FromSoft systems and mechanics. And that fucking rocks. Not just because there were millions of people trying to play a game from a studio that previously made more niche titles for a dedicated audience, but because it somewhat ushered in a microcosm of an era where many players are seeking out memorable experiences outside the tired zeitgeist that's plaguing many AAA titles. People tried out a smaller scale co-op shooter with a persistent universe in Helldivers 2. People tried out a silly game about entering SCP-inspired facilities and getting chased by freaky aliens and Lethal Company. People are trying new things. You know why? Because they're fed up that AAA isn't delivering these kinds of experiences. They're fed up with uninspired, derivative takes on games they've already played better versions of. We deserve more. I often wonder how Returnal would be received if it was released today, instead of in a time when it was difficult to get your hands on a new console. In many ways, Returnal was, and is, a response to AAA malaise, both leveraging the hardware with unique mechanics that partnership games aren't capitalizing on, and centered on telling a bold, unique, weird story. Returnal didn't need to be anything like the big games available on the market. It didn't need to distill itself with bloated design or convoluted systems. It just needed to be everything Housemarque was already doing exceptionally well with their smaller titles. Be a fun game. And it really stings that, for the most part, most big studios aren't operating in this way. As far as Housemarque is concerned, they're already implementing everything they've learned in Returnal with their upcoming title. I have no doubt it'll be an even bigger success. But for Herman, it'll be his responsibility to learn from Returnal how a first-party studio, given a big budget, can still develop a unique game at a modest scale. And the more studios that learn, and possibly adopt, that scaling back to focus on creating focused, formative experiences, the better both Sony and the games industry will be in the long run. Returnal is a weird game. It's a different, unique, odd, smaller, focused game. A formative experience. Returnal is everything the current trends of video games isn't. It's console defining, and it's what makes it so special. It's been 3 years since the release of Returnal, and in the summer of 2024, it's still the PlayStation 5's most important game. Let me know what you think of Returnal. Did you play it when it released? Did you also think it was Game of the Year 2021? And do you think it's one of the PS5's most important games? I'll be waiting for you down in the comments. Until then, my name is Christian, this is Save Room, and we'll see you in the next one.